Good afternoon and welcome back to RHT Grace Institute Forum 2021. I hope you had a good lunch and have your coffee ready as we continue with an exciting afternoon of discussions. Before we start the next panel, please allow me to introduce the panelists. Mr. Rajiv Peshawariya is CEO of Stewardship Asia Center, a non-profit center established under the Temasek Trust, dedicated to helping business leaders, investors, and individuals activate stewardship practice through executive education, research, engagement, and advisory services. Rajiv is an out-of-the-box thought leader on leadership, management, and corporate governance, with extensive global experience in leadership development and organizational consulting, as well as developing and delivering business strategy. Mr. Thomas Thomas is the CEO of the ASEAN CSR Network, a regional network advocating corporate social responsibility by engaging participants in information, education, communication campaigns that promote the practice of CSR, providing representation for the business community to the ASEAN body and other intergovernment agencies or think tanks on relevant policy issues containing CSR. Moderating this panel is Mr. Azman Jafar, Managing Partner and one of the founding partners of RHT Law Asia, a leading Singapore law practice. Azman's corporate practice focuses on energy and resources and the hospitality industries. Fluent in Mandarin and Bahasa Indonesia, he also heads the firm's Indonesian practice and manages ASEAN Plus Group, a grouping of full-service and established law firms in Asia with strong local and international expertise. Over to you, Azman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much there, Raymond. Thank you for the introduction. It's good to be back. Thank you, everyone, for coming back this afternoon. As you know, my name is Azman. I'm the managing partner here at RHT Law Asia. And today's topic this afternoon is going to be very interesting. It's a very complex topic with a lot of issues, and there'll be a lot of things we'll be talking about. And we're very privileged to have with us in our studio two very important gentlemen. On my immediate left here is Thomas Thomas. He's our CEO of ASEAN CSR Network. He's here to tell us a little bit more about a lot of the intricacies between sustainability and ethics in business. And of course, to his left is Rajiv Peshawariya, the CEO of Stewardship Asia. Now, Thomas, he's the founder CEO of ASEAN Corporate Social Responsibility Network, which is an ASEAN entity set up in 2010 to promote responsible business in the region. He leads the ASEAN Responsible and Inclusive Business Alliance initiative with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council. He was also a nominated member of Parliament in Singapore. Now, to his left is Rajiv, and Rajiv is the CEO of Stewardship Asia Center based in Singapore, and he's also the founder president of Leadership Energy Consulting based in Seattle, the US. He's very much an out-of-the-box leadership. He's very much an out-of-the-box thought leader on leadership, management, and corporate governance. Let me tell you a little bit about Rajiv. There's a lot more you can probably read about him. He's also not only an avid contributor to the newspapers. You will also find him on Amazon. He has written quite a number of books as well. So Rajiv is also the author of a book called of the Wall Street Journal, an Amazon bestseller called Open Source Leadership, and many others as well. So now, if we get on to this topic, this is it's a very complex topic. There are a lot of overlapping issues. So let me just bring you through some of these things. Sustainability and ethics in business, what's the current state and progress of this? Now, it's got massive overlaps, and at every stage of the game, we're going to ask ourselves a number of questions. One is, it's about compliance, and it's about sustainability and ethics. So in a sense, who is responsible for enforcement? How do we ensure that there is some measure of enforcement? Are there rules? And for that matter, are there clear rules? And are rules the way to go? Because who enforces these rules and what are the standards? And of course, we have to talk about what is global net zero. Now, understanding compliance and the nature of ethics requires us to also identify who the actors are, who ensures compliance. There are governments and there are state actors. There are private sector businesses and corporates who also have a say in how we ensure compliance in sustainability and ethics. And of course, a very big say also goes to our consumers, members of the public, investors, as well as other stakeholders. Now, because the public has a very big say, some people have said that there is democratization in the broader movement of sustainability, because not only does the public has a big say, but governments also have a big role to play in shaping economic policies by transforming industries and the business environment through legislation and policies to facilitate sustainability. So, and of course, there will also be investor pressure and consumer pressure in the many things that we do. So, with that, if you look at the various topics that come along with it, we also talk about what are the ethical issues in forcing everyone into a net zero path. Now, when we talk about ethical issues of forcing everyone into a net zero path, you'll have to start thinking about why people or corporates or the actors would be encouraged to be forced along into a net zero path. Then how can we also get everyone to comply to protecting communities and natural habitats? And of course, we have this very open-ended question, what are the ethical issues? Now, a lot of this, I think as we know, has got a lot to do with human behavior. And as you can see from COP26, there's so much people have said about governments not doing enough, corporates not doing enough, and I think comes the big question of what more should we do to ensure that there is some measure of success, not only from a policy standpoint, but because COP26 is about the survival of this planet, right? Now, without further ado, I think it's important for us to look at the issue of how we ensure compliance to secure global net zero from the perspective of what compliance really means and how we deal with compliance and sustainability in the context of ethics. With that, I'd like to start off with some questions for Thomas. I think we've had this conversation before because we talked about increased connectivity and the death of privacy, and that as a result of which the public has got a lot to say about this, and people actually look at us for our behaviors when they talk about whether we have complied or we have done the right thing. And I think that seems to be a very big and loaded word today, doing the right thing. How do you think sustainability and ethics actually will play its role in today's marketplace?
Thanks, Osman. I would start off by saying that I think let's look at sustainability. Sustainability is a journey towards achieving sustainable development. Sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And ethics is about doing the right thing. And doing the right thing, even if it is not beneficial for you, even if it's harmful, affects your bottom line, you do it because it's the right thing to do. So it's a bit of moral imperative. And together with the Center for Governance and Sustainability in NUS, we've done some studies and on sustainable reporting. You find that the least reported issues of all the companies, major companies in ASEAN, has been about impact of climate change, product and service stewardship, protection of biodiversity, human rights, labor practices, industrial relations, which actually tells you that in many ways, the measurement of success that capitalism today measures is profits and not the issues of protecting the environment, treating people with respect, dignity, and fairness. And the other point is you're perfectly right. Everybody will say we need to act on climate change today, and we have to have urgent. But the same mentality of not in my neighborhood is the free rider mentality. So let somebody else do it, and I take the benefit of it. Could we put in place measurements that everybody has to do it? So for that, we need to have, we have to get all these many initiatives and all the ideas that are going around to have a coordinated, a clear understanding of what is that one thing. And the other point I want to make is that it's sustainable development and the issues is all interrelated. You can't look in isolation at climate change without looking at good governance, management of corruption. You can't talk about loving the environment when you don't love people and treat people with respect and dignity. So the interrelationship. So I think ethics means that I should be profitable, I should be, as a business, I should prosper, but not by making other people poorer. Be it the environment, be it people, be it your employees, being the community as a whole. So how do we all prosper together and accommodate together? I think that's the, I mean, I put it as a picture, I'll put it that way.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, Rajiv.
So, you made a very interesting point, and that was that, you looked at the reporting and you found that the least amount of reporting by companies in their annual reports is on the issue of sustainability and climate change. The question I have is, if we increased reporting by 100-fold, imagine tomorrow that every company is reporting 5 pages on this. Will we change the world by doing that?
I think the answer is no, because what you report is, what we measured is disclosure.
Yes.
There's always a gap between what you say and what you actually do.
Exactly right.
So a lot of them, you find it in reports, they put a nice picture of themselves.
Precisely.
Nobody will say. But the point is this, that if you report, you will try to write something new, but in the end you will hopefully do a lot of things. But there's also a lot of people who do and write very honestly. I think that we also have to acknowledge.
I always wonder if at the end of the day, the conflict between profit and purpose actually has a very big role to play, because it's a little counterintuitive, I think, to think that in a capitalist world, that if it's not good for me or for my organization, that it can be good for everyone, that I should still do it. It's a bit hard to understand how I could incur loss for my company, but incur a great benefit for the community at large. And in a sense, my conflict at the end of the day will be between my stakeholders and what I think is the right thing to do. And I think the question would be, how does one deal with that? Sorry, Rajiv.
So, here's in my opinion, this is a huge fallacy. The good news is that we're all talking about purpose. The good news is that we're all talking about the fact that we need to save the planet, because what's the business case for sustainability? Well, what's the business case for ending humanity on Earth? So the good news is everybody's talking about it. But I think we may be, in some quarters, thinking about it the wrong way, in thinking that it's a zero-sum game. Profit and purpose is a zero-sum game. Actually, it's not. There is every evidence today, and I just recently read a study which is a meta-analysis of 2,200 studies, which shows the positive impact on bottom line in the long term for ESG excellence, right? So we have to understand that we live in a world today that's fundamentally different from even 10 years ago. And the biggest difference, you mentioned it in your opening remarks earlier, is the death of privacy and the proliferation of connectivity, right? Because of connectivity, we are all naked. Individuals, organizations, we are totally on display. Today's customer and consumer is putting us on notice that if you don't behave correctly, we will vote with our feet. We will not buy your products as long as we have a choice. So actually, it turns out that not only is it not a zero-sum game, if you want to maximize your long-term returns to shareholders, you have to find business models that make you money by addressing the very challenges humanity is facing. And that is the leadership challenge of the 21st century, finding such business models.
That's a very important point that you're making there. Sorry, Thomas, you want to say something?
I'm just saying that when you talk about profits and purpose, the profits is measured, it's a measurement. You look at dollars and cents. But in real life, in reality, if you invest in the community, with the health and well-being of the community, you got healthier employees, and you got healthier employees, they have less sick leave, your productivity goes up. If you contribute to building up talent in the organization, eventually you benefit. So there is a correlation between the sustainability and I think Lawrence and we did a study sometime ago, correlation between disclosure and share value, and there is a correlation within the companies, similarly to the brand value and sustainability. So, but I think this is not in the front because we are all obsessed with looking at the dollar sign. and we think the starting and ending of dollar signs. But I think the purpose is like somebody said, if should I have a company to start building, making shirts, and say my purpose is to make the best profits, or I make the best shirts. I make the best shirts that consumers want, and if I make the best shirts, meet the needs, and your business will boom.
Yeah, but I hate to say that I've come to understand that the fashion industry is one of the biggest contributors to wastage. But sorry, yes.
The difference, though, between what you just said and today is that earlier I could make inferior shirts and maximize my profit and get away with it.
Now you can't.
Today,
can't.
you cannot because you are on display. And with the death of privacy, somebody can actually call you out without. I mean, 2 clicks is all it takes.
Correct.
So that's where the hope is, that people will learn to do the right thing. Because
but what is also interesting is sometimes I wonder, we say that all this is already out there, that people are calling out producers and manufacturers who are not doing the right thing. But yet, in a lot of articles we read, we're still talking about sustainability and ethics in business because it continues to be an area that is not fully thought out and sometimes I think not well handled by corporates. And I think, what would that be? What would be the reason for that? The lack of compliance regulations or governments not doing enough?
Okay, I did a study for the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, on CSR and human rights in ASEAN. We found that every country in ASEAN has good laws. And the great, nice statements about we the people, people-centered, human rights and all that. So the laws are there, the intentions are there, but I think it is implementation. And why implementation? I think it's leadership. The tone from the top makes a lot of difference, number one. Number two is corruption. We have the greed for money and short term has destroyed basically our environment, stopped the enforcement of laws, and great things. So here is again the question. We can't address sustainability, we can't address ethics. We also have to talk about values. What is our own personal values? I mean, you can say I have white hair and no hair. I have seen a lot of leadership where the guy on the top works on ethics and leadership. It comes. You just change the guy on the top, you find everybody else flow because they all want to say the right thing to please the boss. To the right. What he wants to hear, you tell him. So it's not very few people who say exactly what they feel.
I also would like to look at this from 2 angles. One is, from a country perspective. I mean, I think I've always understood that how we implement this culturally, these impact on communities and people differently in different countries. Some countries, maybe like Singapore, where it's smaller, things are a bit more clinical, it's a bit more clean, if you like, in terms of lines, you know where things are going. And in countries which are bigger, it's a lot more difficult. But of course, there are also complications when you talk about the world as a whole. You're talking about state actors, you're talking about governments, you're talking about small countries, and you're talking about people who advocate the right things that we should do. But sometimes I feel, unfortunately, that it's a bit oversimplified, that you want the right things to be done, but unfortunately it comes at a great cost. And especially to small countries, they're not constituents of a bigger organization where you could dole out cash to say, here's some money, let's get this fixed. Because I think we all know that diplomatically there are bigger concerns between how countries behave towards each other, and of course there's geopolitics as well. But how do you think we can manage this better in terms of, because the way I look at it, as much as you say values, I sense that sometimes because values change every time the top leadership changes, how are we going to ensure there's going to be a little bit more consistent when it comes to global leadership in this sense? You know that just prior to this year, the earlier COP25 and all that were a little bit more difficult for a variety of reasons, for political reasons. It's better this year, and hopefully moving forward for 27 and so on, it'll be better all around. What are your thoughts?
I think one of the reasons why things go better is because people start realizing the urgency. I think when it rains, then the importance of an umbrella is realized more than when there is no rain. So I think people are feeling the heat of climate change and the climate crisis. I think having global standards, global things, it's always been a challenge. I think when the excesses of capitalism in the 1990s were trying to push, the ILO actually came out with the Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, where they have 8 conventions. They say they will look at all the countries, how they implement it, whether you rectify it or not. Right to collective bargaining, child labor, forced labor, equal pay for equal work of equal. So in other words, every company, MNC, has to implement it regardless of whether the state has rectified it. But if you really look at today, many countries, it's still an issue from 1998, doing up things. So why is it so? Because I think it's 2 things. Your personal values and the drive for profits means you have to exploit, whether you exploit resources by spoiling the environment or exploit people. So we need to talk about how do we change the mindset from an exploitative model of capitalism to a model that we prosper together. And for that, we have to, I think the great pressure from many countries will be educating the voters. Amartya Sen in his thing showed quite clearly in one of his books I read that when you have voters, the famines disappeared in India when they have democracy. Similarly, educating voters. But educating voters is a big challenge because if you just look at our Southeast Asia, some of the most corrupt leaders are winning elections or going to be hot favorites to come back, which again says that yes, there is a media, but if you have enough money, enough resources, you can also manipulate data, can manipulate things and change the things. So I think we just need to have a principled leadership. And we cannot depend on one man, but I think it's just the whole grassroots. And I think what is also happening is I go for some organizations, meetings, things. You find that some of the corporates will also send lots of NGOs and all of them doing different things. But there's some very principled. Where are the principled things? So throughout the world today, one of the biggest one of these biggest victim of many of these changes is trust. So we need to build back trust, and trust in institutions, trust in our religions, trust in our morality. I think that's where the challenge is.
You know, I noticed that at the end of the day, when we deal with, when you mentioned the education of voters and so on, it's a very localized problem that a country faces, where political leadership is looking at, okay, even if I say, if I'm the Prime Minister and I say I want to do better for my people, it's then the conflict that you have then with your opponent, who will have the counter narrative and because he's fighting you, so he wants to get into power. He will look for his own narrative, which will be contradictory to mine. But I also see that it now becomes important for those in global leadership to play their role. And I was wondering, how does steward leadership, in the way which Rajiv is very familiar with, how does global steward leadership actually play a role in this? Because I can foresee that if you want countries to comply, very big geopolitical players will have to assert, well, it's probably a carrot and stick approach to smaller countries and countries which are not compliant, all right, to start the ball rolling and begin compliance by ensuring that some measure of ethics and correct values actually get into the way they do things.
So, you've both touched on this idea of how can we make sure that the right thing happens? How can we make sure that rules are followed, compliance is more adhered, etc.? And I just have one humble offering to make here, and that is that the challenges that humanity is facing today, if we rely on rules, regulation, and compliance to save the world, we are doomed already. Because as much as we need regulation, as much as we need rules, as much as we need compliance, and I'm not saying we don't need them, we absolutely do, but history has shown us that rules and regulations and punishment is an inadequate tool to change human behavior. The more rules, the more people find ingenious ways to go around them, you see. So that is not going to be in itself the solution. Again, the regulators have their job to do. Governments have their job to do. I'm not saying they don't. But we need much more than that. What do we need? We need genuine leadership intent on the part of every human being on this planet to take responsibility and do their small bit. Yeah, and this is where steward leadership comes in. So we define steward leadership as the genuine desire and persistence to create a collective better future. Not just a better future, a collective better future, where the needs of shareholders, employees, society at large, future generations, and the environment are also taken into account. As I mentioned earlier, the leadership challenge of the 21st century is to find profitable business models that make money by addressing the very challenges that humanity is facing, and that is a very personal choice. So not only the CEOs, not only the people at the top, but everybody needs to understand that ask themselves, what legacy do I want to leave? Do I have the right? You talk about ethics. So in ethics, right? The developed countries are accusing India and China to say that they are the ones who are creating the problem. India and China is saying, oh, you guys are the ones who polluted the world, and now you're telling us to do this. I think both are ethically wrong, right? Just because one did wrong in the past does not give me an excuse to continue to do that wrong today just because it's my time. And so what do we mean by ethics? What we've concluded is that steward leadership says there are 4 core values that we need to imbibe if we want to practice this. And one is interdependence. The idea is that your success depends on mine depends on me. We have to really imbibe that into the culture that everybody believes in interdependence. The other is long-term view. You got to take a longer-term view. The third is ownership mentality. I have to take ownership and make stewardship happen, meaning it is my responsibility to do a little bit towards this problem. And finally, we all know this is tough, so we need creative resilience. The tenacity to not give up and to keep looking for innovative solutions. So unless these values are more than just posters on the wall, right, where, oh, everybody's talking about purpose statements and value statements these days because it's fashionable to say, but there's corruption there too. Just putting a purpose statement and value statements out there and not doing anything about it is a form of corruption, I'm sorry. You have to imbibe this in your culture. You have to look at your recruiting systems, your compensation and reward systems, your promotion systems to see how are we succeeding. Only then, and as Thomas said, it has to be walk the talk from the top. Only then will the culture take root. Only then will we save humanity. So it's education, it's deep awareness about steward leadership that we need to create, and that ownership that everybody needs to take.
I can't help but feel that because there is this, because it's not about an individual, of course there is ownership, but because it's the collective individual, right? I mean, me doing my part, you doing your part, that's going to make this difference. And I can't help but feel that in a world where trust has broken down, it becomes very difficult to rebuild this understanding of interdependence. You can already see it happen between the US and China over who's responsible for what, whether it's got to do with pollution, whether it's got to do with greenhouse gases, the coal-fired plants and so on. But I'm not sure about whether any one of us can talk about the possibility of creating opportunities for them to mend the breakdown in trust here. Do you have any views about that? Maybe Thomas?
I think the solution for trust, to build trust, is to show more openness, transparency. And because the more open and transparent you are, the better it is. But unfortunately, we all have many of these leaders have a short-term political agenda. In the US, every 2 years there's an election. So you need to, and one of the easiest way to get people around you is to have a common enemy and say, this is a bad guy, let's go and bash him all up. So we do that. And you find that throughout history, whenever empires, kingdoms decline, they look for an enemy, have a war, and then everybody comes up and you consolidate power and things. So I think the solution is to really articulate that all businesses need to work on some value statements. I think Stewardship Asia talks about 4 values. With ASEAN CSR Network, together with ASEAN Business Advisory Council, we try to get this network of responsible, inclusive business. And we talk about 7 values: accountability, transparency, ethical behavior, respect for stakeholders, interest, respect for the rule of law, respect for international norms of behavior, and to treat people with respect, dignity, and fairness. If you put those values in everything you do, whether it's in governance, it's a small way. But even then, you may need very clear statements of what exactly do you mean by ethical. There's a difference between ethical and ethics. And also you look at all our constitutions, say we the people, we want to do. But sometimes you ask yourself, who is the people?
Corporates, maybe.
Yeah, whoever has got the
politicians, maybe.
Is it really the people, or is it civil society, whoever is articulating, is it political parties? So I think this is where some of our dilemmas. So eventually ethics is the management of dilemmas. We may have to move. We can't go straight away to the perfect, but at least start with doing the lesser of 2 evils and move on to the right things, I think.
I had a read of your leadership maturity continuum, and I find it very fascinating. And I always wondered that at the end of the day, it might seem that what's important for all of us is that there's a role to play in all these think tanks and NGOs to keep promoting the understanding of or the importance of personal values, and of course the right personal values. And unfortunately, it's going to come in the way of something that's going to be very top-down, which a lot of people usually never liked. It seems to run counter to what, well, maybe not so much in Asia, but perhaps in the West, where people favor freedom, the freedom to decide, what you choose to believe and so on. Whereas in Asia, we tend to say, well, we have generations of values passed down and we should observe them. But I tend to think that it's just, in a way, as societies progress, we're quite similar in some ways and maybe different in others. But how do you, again, sometimes I come back to the same problem about the great difficulty I see in trying to mold communities and societies in the way we now see them as being necessary. Because like you said, if we don't fix this, the survival of this planet is now at stake. I mean, how do you convince everyone? If you could see an election ago, people were convinced that, global warming is unreal, it's fake news, as somebody once said. And there are people who believe this. So in the context of how open communities and societies have become with the internet, it's also gone the other way, where fake news have confused the crowd over what is real, what is important, and what actually needs to be done. And I can see that a very concerted effort on the part of the world needs to come about. Well, maybe we have COP26 and there'll be more to come that will do much more. But what is your feel about how ethics and leadership can now play its role at the global level? And I always worry at the global level because if the world gets together, I think small countries will get together as well. So
again,
yes,
you mentioned China and the US. And the question I usually ask people is this: what's the #1 lesson COVID-19 has taught us? You want to think about that? What is the #1 lesson COVID-19 has given us? Your view on that?
Yes, interdependence.
Interdependence.
Exactly, that no one is safe until everyone is safe, right?
Yeah.
With that background, the only way this is going to work is, humanity does not have a good history of multilateral collaboration. Because even though no one is safe until everyone is safe, everybody thinks about my position, my power, my company, my family, or my country at the best, right? And today we need to break those boundaries and think beyond my country. My world, my planet is our planet is what we need to think about. So if Joe Biden and Xi Jinping are actually real leaders, if they are really steward leaders, they will rise above and find a way to make that multilateral collaboration happen, and only those two gentlemen can do it. If they don't find the way to do that, I'm sorry, they are not leaders. It's as simple as that. That is the challenge humanity is facing today. Second point I'll make is this. You mentioned trust, right? What is trust at the end of the day? Trust is that I can totally believe that you will do what you say even when no one is looking at you. You will do the right thing. So again, people make statements about these are my values, this is my purpose, or this is the company's values, this is the purpose. No. What do you do when the rubber hits the road? How do you actually behave when no one is looking, when you have a temptation in front of you? You gain trust by walking the talk. You gain trust by developing a stewardship purpose, which is a purpose bigger than yourself, a collective better future. Now, consistently show me that you're walking down that path. I know then that you will take care of me because you're looking at a collective better future, not at my cost. You're not looking at blame. That's how trust is built. I'm not saying anything new. Truth, humility, nonviolence are as old as the hills, as Mahatma Gandhi used to say.
Wow. I'm really hoping this is being beamed to Washington and Beijing. Maybe it is, but I really see what you just said really resonate with what a lot of us think in terms of what global leadership will have to do. But in terms of I'd like to come back to something a bit more on the ground here. So that's at the global side, and of course, when the world comes together, hopefully, I think there is going to be a lot more compliance at member states, right, amongst member states, as these are your basis, if you like, for identifying communities within the planet. But then the difficulty comes with this. In many of these countries, they have very limited resources. And of course, even in big countries, they have limited resources. How do we balance out the need for, because in wanting things to be done, I think it's one thing to say that we all should behave this way, but it's another thing to say that, for example, that we should phase out coal in so many years. And here you have, a 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 small countries that still needs coal because they don't have the capital nor resources to build the next generation of plants that will either scrub the coal scrub the carbon before the carbon gets released, or that it's based on some other alternative form of energy generation. How do we deal? Sorry. Yes.
No, I think key thing is for every change, there's going to be consequences. I think it's easy for people to say, let's have no coal. But how do you move coal when it affects jobs, it affects people's livelihoods? So I think it is also a matter of a just transition, a transition that is fair, transition for moving from where we are to where we want to go. And just as we realized from COVID, there is, you can't, infection anywhere affects infection everywhere. Or like the ILO says, poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. So we have to push that interdependency, and it's in our own self-interest to help everybody lift up. I think that's the main point. Do we have? There's funds there. There's a lot of commitments, but I think people agree to give money. But from the reports I read, sometimes the money doesn't appear.
Yeah, and I think I can't help but feel that a lot now depends on how much of what we see is hurting us, because we've already seen the effects of climate change. All right, from a very different hurricane season to a very different typhoon season to earthquakes in the odd places of the world, and so on. And perhaps at some point, this will trigger a global reaction to do much more. Before we develop that a little bit, I thought I've just been given some questions here, so I have 2 questions for our panel. The first question is, how can we condition behaviors to achieve pro-climate and pro-environment behaviors? Is there a way in which you foresee how we can actually condition such behaviors?
I'll give you my quick 2 cents.
Sure.
I myself was not behaving in a way that I should behave about climate change and about environmental sustainability. I myself was doing all the wrong things for the environment until a few years ago. What changed for me? Education and awareness. Once I became aware of what I was doing, Once I became more educated about what was at stake, I've stopped doing those things, and now I have started doing my little bit. Not that I'm doing a superb job here, but I'm conscious. So the short answer to your question, in my humble opinion, is education, 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 awareness, 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 and we have a huge gap in making people aware of what is at stake.
Thank you.
And
Yes,
I
Thomas.
think the education need to start from young, from schools, and people grow up. And you also need education is by setting examples. I think the example setting is quite important as well. Leadership by example.
I think sometimes I see this, it's quite strange. For the many things Singapore has been known for, one of the first few countries I noticed where they told me that, oh, you want plastic bag, you got to pay for it. And it's not going to be the cheap plastic bag. You're going to have to pay for the expensive one. It costs £2. We still have plastic bags. So some people say that we're not doing enough. We're not serious enough in this. And sometimes I worry that at the end of the day, we've become too dependent on government telling us what to do before we do the right thing. But it also goes to show that at the end of the day, when we talk about conditioning behaviors to achieve the end game here, which is a behavior that's pro-climate and pro-environment, I think it's got to start with yourself. And it would not just have to start with yourself, but while we can take the cue from the government and other think tanks and NGOs, but if there's no self-realization in this, it becomes quite difficult, I think.
And that's exactly why we need to raise that awareness at the ground level. You rightly said it has to start at school, but I strongly believe also it has to be at the top. There is huge gap of knowledge and awareness at the top. We say one thing, we do another thing. So when we talk about ethics, when we talk about all of these things and what we need to do, we need to raise the level of awareness significantly in all levels, top, middle, and bottom. And it has to start with the self. There's no two ways about it.
I think one of the reasons why the leadership example doesn't go is there's also feeling of impunity at certain levels. You're a certain place, you can get away with it. So I think that's where the awareness and education of the masses and the people is also things for us to say it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do.
There's something that struck me as both of you were talking just now. As much as we talk about awareness, I realize that some of our best activists are very strong and vocal advocates, right? And what made them very powerful in the sense that people hear them, people listen to them, is the fact that they're very passionate about their dreams, their ideals, what they want to achieve, which I think sometimes in leadership, we have leaders who are very effective, but we also have leaders who are effective, but maybe they don't articulate as much their impassioned plea for everyone to get together. And perhaps that's what leadership has got to do. Because in our firm, we once said that we have to do more for advocacy when it comes to sustainability and ESG. Then, of course, people would ask us, but why? It's just a practice area. But we thought that, particularly in climate change, if you don't walk the talk, not a lot of people are going to pay attention to you. So if you want to be effective, you've got to be more passionate about this ideal of changing the world.
And that kind of strong communication which you're talking about, which leaders need, only comes from conviction. Gandhi was not a great communicator to begin with, but as he became more convinced about his values and purpose, which is to achieve freedom without firing a bullet, right? He became the most amazing speaker. The most amazing communicator. It came from that deep conviction in values and purpose. And so leaders that are not convincing enough actually haven't convinced themselves. That is the issue. So the more convinced you are yourself, the more impassioned your pleas will be. So first, again, coming back to your earlier point, has to start with yourself. Who am I? Why am I in this world? How will the world be slightly better because I lived here for 100 years? If we cannot answer those basic questions, we haven't done our job.
And it'll be the end of the world soon, I guess. Thomas, yes.
No, I agree with Rajiv. I think if you can see many of the state leadership, they're reading from the text or they're saying some things and there's no conviction. And sometimes you wonder whether they are also following what they are reading.
Yeah, I know. Some people will complain about Greta Thunberg, but to be fair, she says it without mincing words.
Yeah.
Right? And people do listen to her.
But you see, it's again the media and a whole lot of things.
Yes.
If she was a young girl in
If she was
Indonesia or
if she was a
Philippines,
statesman, yeah.
will she get the attention? So I think there's a lot of young activists throughout our region, but they just are not. The narrative they put up,
They're not
is
heard. They're not heard. Okay, I've got another question here. Excuse me. And the question is this: how skillful do you think our business leaders are in doing so? What do you think would motivate them to do so, to be a better leaders in sustainability and in ethics?
Okay, I took a long journey. I started this journey when I was with Case, and we did head a task force, did a study on CSR, which we defined as not philanthropy, not charity. It's not what you do with your money, but how did you make that money? And just at the time, in the early 20s, I remember going out to a government ministry, talking to Permsac, and his answer was, does this increase the GDP? Does it create jobs? If it doesn't create jobs, we are not interested. So I'm just saying that from those days in early to today, where everybody talks about sustainability, sometimes I hear him say this. Same guy who told me not interested, now talking so much of passion, shows things are moving. Okay, but I think the key part of leadership is the awareness raising and building up those things. What can we change? I'm also trying to find the silver bullet.
Maybe I can add to that. You asked about what are leaders good at it today. So, earlier you mentioned the death of privacy. Now, in the otherwise dark cloud of the death of privacy, there is perhaps one silver lining. That this death of privacy is perhaps making society a little bit more honest and a little bit more responsible. Why? Because now we are all on display. And what we do and what we don't do is completely on display. So there is a built-in audit mechanism. There is a built-in pressure to do the right thing. So I'm hopeful, I'm net optimistic that leaders will realize that, I am on display and what is going to be my legacy or not, and therefore I better do the right thing. And that is why a lot of people are talking about sustainability these days. I recently wrote an article talking about the 5 personas of sustainability action. On the worst end is greenwashers and window dressers who deceive willfully or do just a little bit to look good. And the other end is steward leaders who genuinely want to create a collective better future. And the Paul Polmans of the world, former Unilever CEO, provided 290% return to shareholders with a sustainable living plan. People like Howard Schultz of Starbucks, 21,000% growth since IPO by focusing on societal issues. You see, they embedded it into the business plan itself. So leaders have an opportunity. Every turn of technology, every turn of an era, and we are in one of those tectonic shifts right now, right? Remember when electricity was invented, everything changed. When the internet went mainstream, everything changed. Today, we are facing one of those tectonic shifts. And leaders those who rise to the challenge of steward leadership, as I've talked about, are the ones who are going to be remembered. But remember, those who are digging their head in the sand, you are on display.
I remember there was a Harvard Business Review article on the sustainability imperative a few years ago, and I go around sharing that. That means it's going to be one of those mega trends, and the mega trends are there. I think one of the key parts of our failure is that we expect others to do it, and it's a free rider issue. It is just like when I was in trade unions, we had this whole thought. Some people pay and contribute, but a lot of others will just come for it. I think a lot of business leaders and things, somebody else will do it, somewhere else will take place, and we will enjoy the benefit. So I think we must also address these free rider issues. We also must say there are too many initiatives. So some of this greenwashing and blue washing and whitewashing takes place because I can pick and choose what I want to do. So I think in sustainability, we say you should prioritize based on your materiality and work on the issues that is really affecting you. But the pick and choose is you pick and choose what makes you look good, but not necessarily good. So I think we need that mindset change. And unless we have this mindset change, things are difficult.
Hence
And
that ownership mentality.
Yes.
You have to take ownership. You know, I used to think that values are very personal for every organization and for every individual. No, but today to save the planet, I've changed my view. We need to have certain collective values, hence the four that we mentioned. All my earlier writings, I used to talk about the democratization of values. But now we are saying if we are going to save the planet, we need those four. And this is based on a lot of research.
I think you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Unilever and Starbucks and so on, because it comes to mind one thing that's very important about this is that our business leaders, in the context of the question, of course, that our business leaders have this every opportunity to frame the narrative they want in today's context to save the planet. It's just that have they done so? Because if you can make money, make the same amount of money, if not more, by being compliant, if you wish, to use the word very loosely, to ensure that your business for the entire world, for that particular chain of products that you're producing, is sustainable, then why shouldn't you do it? Instead of choosing the easy way out of just having window dressing, if you wish, greenwashing, if you wish, when you can do actually much more. And I think that's where if you then have the kind of deep steward leadership, the kind of personal values that you talk about, then it would mean that many more would probably then join the fray. And then we would be a better world for everyone.
Because, you know, the rules as a way to control the future is an outdated idea. Rules today, in today's fast-paced world, get outdated before the ink dries on them.
No.
So values is what is going to save the world. That's as simple.
If I could say, I think when you talk about making money, it's a business case. Is it good for business in terms of money? I think we should also have the moral case there as well, which is the ethics. This is the right thing to do. And I think the third one not in my backyard and free rider issue is to create norms that everybody do it because it's part of the accepted things. I think in Singapore, nobody literally returns. I know when my children go, so they take their rubbish and put it in their pockets, in their handbags. And some countries, people don't understand, why are you doing that? So it has to be ingrained. And I think we just need more and more education, more and more awareness.
But it goes to show that it can be done.
It can be done. So I'm an optimist because I've seen, when I first started working, I worked in an oil refinery. And sometimes you do some things, they say, you take the risk, safety or production. You have to take the risk, do it. But today, many years later, nobody talks about taking the risk. If it's not a choice between safety and production. It is safe production or no production. So I'm also working and hoping that we will have a world where you don't talk about profits or responsibility, profits or this, it's responsible profits. It goes together.
Thank you, Thomas. Rajiv and Thomas, we're almost right down to the last minute of our panel discussion. I'd like to know if we can have some closing words from both of you. There's just too much to round off, I suppose. I'd rather not do that and save the time for both our guests. Maybe Rajiv, if you can start first.
Well, all I'll say is that leadership is a choice. Taking ownership is a choice. Leaving a positive legacy is a choice. Make it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also just add that join like-minded people. I think both of us has been trying to run organizations that are trying to endeavor to join us. And we have in ASEAN, the ASEAN Responsible Business, Inclusive Business Alliance. We hope that will also drive part of this agenda. So we just need more and more voices to make it an avalanche.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I think this kind of marks the end of our discussion this afternoon. Quite clearly, no, not quite clearly, very clearly, it is important for all of us to understand the very deep nature of wanting to do the right thing here, because sustainability and ethics doesn't come across as something that's just an issue in compliance. It is an issue in personal values as well as leadership. And we hope that many of you would have been able to take away some of the important lessons that we've had here, and that we can now start or embark on this journey, not just to change ourselves, and we can start with our families, our children, our friends around us, but also our organizations, because that's where we've got to start. With that, I end off this afternoon's discussion. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Asma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that stimulating discussion.